Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. We really appreciate you being here. We really do appreciate you being here for Ben's talk. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then he's going to talk about his wonderful project. Ben Brands is the PhD candidate in history, and he specializes in the history of the United States Army in the 19th century. He received his BA from the College of William and Mary, and then his MA from George Mason University in 2015. He served as an assistant professor at the United States Military Academy in West Point, and he taught courses there on military history and the American Civil War. He's currently working on his dissertation, tentatively titled Natural Genius versus Safe Leadership, the Debate Over Professional Military Education in the United States Army, 1880 to 1903. He's also studied the use of virtual reality in higher education, and he also served as an infantry officer in the United States Army for 12 years. And he's been the L. Claire Kincannon intern at George Mason University Library Special Collections Research Center for the past 2 years. And I can't say enough of how much we here at SCRC really appreciate Ben being a part of our team. He has taken what was a bunch of letters that were very interesting and made them accessible. He spent hours and hours on the smallest minutia of detail, and we couldn't have done this amount of work without Ben's Army knowledge too. But just as a member of SCRC, we say thank you so much for being a part of our team. Let's welcome Ben.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. Since Lynn bored you with way more information about me than I think you really care about, I can skip that part and go straight to the project. So I started on this project in January of 2018, and I was just a couple weeks out of the Army after spending most of my adult life in the Army. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life now that I was out of the Army. I knew I was working on my PhD, but I decided I wanted to get some more kind of hands-on experience, broaden my resume, and kind of start getting the experience I would need for the next chapter of my life. And so I decided that I would, in addition to working on the PhD, I would try and get some experience with a part-time job working at the archives here. There was a processing assistant position that was open and advertised, and I applied for that. Came in and interviewed with Amanda and Brittany, and it was the first job interview I'd ever done in my life. I was 37 years old, and it was the first job interview I'd ever had. I did ROTC as an undergrad at William & Mary, commissioned and went straight in the Army. I'd done that for my entire adult life. I'd never had the experience of going on a job interview. So put on a nice suit, came in here to the Special Collections Research Center, and actually we did it in this room. This is where the interview was. And I thought it went really well. Like, I thought I did a great job answering the questions. I thought my resume was strong with some stuff in my background and experience that would make me well suited for working in the archives. And I really left feeling really confident that I had done well. And 2 days later, I got an email that I had not been selected for the position. But that was good news because one of the reasons they didn't select me was that they had the L. Claire Kincannon internship available as well, that they thought I would be really well suited for based on kind of my experience with digital tools and my experience with in the military. And so they didn't select me for the job I interviewed for, but they asked me to come on as the inaugural L. Claire Kincannon intern, which has been a great experience. And so the Kincannon internship was founded by Claire Kincannon, who was a theater critic who was deeply involved in theater and donated a large collection of theater-related materials to Special Collections Research Center, and theater being one of the kind of focuses and strong suits of the center here. But she also donated a collection from Jerome Epstein, the Jerome Epstein papers, which was her cousin who had served in World War II in the Army, and he had a collection that had a bunch of his World War II memorabilia and papers, as well as family videos and photographs from his entire life. And so that was donated along with Claire's materials. And Claire also very generously donated the funding to fund an internship one semester every year to work with the collections that she had donated here. And so I was the first intern under that program, and I came in, and the scope of work was that they wanted me to take the World War II letters of Jerome Epstein, digitize them with the scanning equipment here, transcribe them, and so that the letters would have transcription available to make them more accessible. Put them on the web with both the images of the original letters as well as transcriptions that I wrote out by reading his letters. And so that was kind of what I was hired to do. And I came in and, all right, I said I wouldn't talk about myself, but I'm going to back up and give a little bit more background as it relates to this project. Is that I came to George Mason University to do a PhD, and I expected to do a very standard PhD, was interested in military history, want to go do archival research, look at a bunch of primary source documents, and then write 250 to 300 pages, which I promise I'm working on. And that was my plan. But I came here, and George Mason has a very strong digital history program, and they require PhD students actually to take 2 semesters. So I took 2 semesters of digital history here at the college, and kind of was exposed to the concepts and tools of digital history and digital humanities. And then after my second year at George Mason, I was still in active duty at the time, went up and taught for 2 years at West Point. And as soon as I got to West Point, they were like, oh, you went to George Mason University. You're going to be our digital historian. And so I spent another 2 years at West Point, involved with a lot of digital projects up there. The department head was very, very excited about what digital tools could do for learning and teaching and researching history. And so he funded a bunch of projects that I got to work on up there, including virtual reality, digital textbooks, and other initiatives. And so I've kind of, maybe not against my will, but unintentionally have become a true believer in digital history and digital humanities. I don't think it's the be-all, end-all of the history field, but I think it provides some tools both for research, teaching, and storytelling that are hard to do with traditional methods. And so that's kind of how I came to the project. And so I looked at what they wanted me to do. The original plan was to digitize these, transcribe them, put them up on Luna, which is the Special Collections Research Center's digital repository. And very quickly into the internship, I felt that that wasn't the right way to do this project, and that we were doing that kind of as the default because that's what the center used, but Luna is really designed for images. And very selfishly, if I was going to spend months hand transcribing these letters, I wanted the transcriptions to be the focal point of the end result. And with Luna, there's really nowhere, it's not built to have transcriptions. So there really was no good way to put the transcriptions into Luna other than just putting them in a metadata field that would be counterintuitive to find. It would not immediately be apparent to the kind of average user that the transcription even existed. And so I went to Lynn and I went to Liz, who was my supervisor, and said, hey, I think there's a better way to do this. I think we can do more. And they were very supportive in allowing me to do that and letting me do that. And Claire was very supportive in allowing me to do that, partially because there is an opportunity cost of digital history, and that is time. And so it required a second semester to make that project work. And so the project from the beginning was built around these letters. And so Jerome Epstein was a young enlisted soldier in World War II. He enlisted when he was 17, reported to active duty shortly after he turned 18. And he joined what was called at the time the Army Specialized Training Program, with the idea that he would go to basic training, do his initial training, and then he would go back to a civilian college and get specialized training in a technical skill that the Army needed. And so it was going to be kind of a non-combat technical job that required training, and he was going to spend a year or two at a college campus. But very shortly after he reported to basic training, the Army was in the middle of the U.S. was in the middle of the North African campaign. It was in the middle of some campaigns in the Pacific, and the need for combat replacements began to outstrip the pipeline. And so the Army canceled the specialized training program just a few weeks after he reported for basic training, and he was rerouted after basic training into a line unit. He was initially sent for infantry training, but then very shortly after that was transferred to become a radio operator. And so he spent the balance of the war training to be a radio operator for the Army, and eventually deployed to the Italian theater with the 10th Mountain Division, and was in on the closing days of the war in Italy. Landed in January of 45, and fought in Italy until the German surrender in May of 45, and then stayed over for a little while during occupation, And then 10th Mountain was actually templated for the invasion of Japan. And so they were shipped home for the invasion of Japan. While they're on their boats crossing the ocean, Truman drops the nuclear weapons on Japan and ends the war. And so by the time he gets to the States, the plan is very much changed, much to his delight, because one of the things that came out throughout the letters was he would rather not go to combat if he didn't have to, and if he had to go to combat, he definitely wanted to go to the European theater and not the Pacific theater, which if you've read very much about the Pacific theater is a pretty understandable feeling. But the way the Army worked in World War II is that discharges after the war were controlled by points, and you earned points as a soldier for how long you had spent in the Army, how long you had spent overseas, campaigns you had participated in, and medals you'd been awarded. Since he didn't arrive until very late in the war, he was very low points and ended up staying in the Army until April of '46 before he was discharged. So almost a year after the war in Italy ends is when he finally gets out. And he was a very prolific letter writer, very close to his family, wrote letters the entire time. Sometimes every single day he would send a letter home, sometimes multiple letters a day. The other interesting thing about World War II is that, and even today actually, I had this when I was in Iraq, Afghanistan, the military has provided free postage if you're in a combat zone. And so his letters home are free, but they would go through the military system. And Jerome was so concerned with about staying in touch with his family that he paid out of pocket for airmail stamps for the entire war and sent all of his letters home via airmail so they would get there quicker, which is just an interesting thing to think about. Because, I mean, you're talking, his monthly pay was about $15 before combat pay. And so he's spending a substantial amount of his money on postage. And then the final thing I'll note before I go into kind of the project is, if you'll see the title I chose, Please Send Food, a GI's War in Italy. One of the other fun things about reading the letters is you really get the feeling that you almost know Jerome because you're side by side with him through the entire experience. But he's very focused on food, which I guess is not that surprising for an 18-year-old. But he'll spend a good portion of some of his letters home describing exactly what he ate for his meals, which if you've ever been in the Army and deployed is an understandable focus. But when he gets to Italy, he starts signing every letter with P.S. Please send food. And then after a couple weeks in Italy, he actually ends every page of every letter with please send food if you desire. Sometimes even breaking off mid-sentence to like make sure he gets it in before he runs out of space. Okay. So those are the letters. That's what I had to work with. About 100 letters that he sent between when he enlisted and when he goes to Italy. They're grouped kind of by how busy he was, which is some of the operational periods there are much less letters for because he didn't have time to write. But that was kind of the focus of the project. And so as I started thinking about how should we digitally present this, make it accessible, how do we add value to this and make it a valuable product that is going to be good to go out for the public and make these accessible to the public and really give people access to them, I kind of had to think about what the end product would look like. And so when you're doing a digital project, there's kind of two methods that you can choose from. You can start with the vision of what you want and then build exactly that from the ground up. Or you can kind of start with that vision, look at what is out there already existing software and see how close you can come. And there's trade-offs for both. Open source software is open source software, so it's never going to get you exactly what you want, but you can usually get something pretty close. And then the problem with doing the ideal custom build from the ground up is it requires a lot of time and a lot of skill. You essentially have to be a fully trained developer, which is not a skill set I had. Very quickly, it was obvious we were going to be using open source existing digital history products. And so I started to look at how much time do I have, what do I want this to look at, what skill set do I have, and figure out what to do. And so very quickly settled on Omeka S for a number of reasons. Omeka S is essentially a online exhibit building software that's produced by George Mason's Center for History and New Media. And so it's basically built around taking a collection of images, artifacts, whatever, digitizing them, and then using them as items that you then build exhibits and pages with. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do. The other thing I really wanted to include in this is because the letters come from all various different places he served during his time, is I wanted to have a geographical component. And so I looked at using Neatline, which is a plugin for Omeka that allows you to map and use timelines. And so the first day of the semester, the second semester when I was working on this, I pulled and drew what I wanted it to look like. And that version had both mapping and a timeline because I wanted people to be able to explore the letters in different ways based on what they were looking for. But Neatline ended up not working because it's a plugin for Omeka, and we were using Omeka S, which is a newer, less mature software, and Neatline hasn't been optimized for yet, the module for Omeka S hasn't been built yet. And so I started looking at some of the other mapping options that are out there. Many of them required more skill than I have. They would have required some pretty advanced GIS knowledge. And so I ended up with Story Maps, which is a pretty basic, pretty user-friendly digital tool that allows you to create basically geolocated slides, essentially. If you want to think about PowerPoint, but each slide is tied to a geographic location, and it moves throughout the map as you go through. That's essentially what Story Maps does. And so that's kind of what I decided to do for the project, and then started building the website. And so the first step was not yet. So the first step was building the items. And so the way Omeka S works is that it's built around items. And so each item is a specific historic object. In this case, the items are all letters. So I built each letter and ended up reducing it down to about 95. There were a couple letters I eliminated because they either were incomplete or they were included in the collection but weren't from Jerome. There was a couple letters from other members of the family that were included in there. And so I eliminated those, but we ended up with 95 letters total. For each letter, this is the back side of Omeka S, so this is the developer side. Each letter involves putting in the metadata, which you can see here, and then all the metadata to give you the information, images for each page, and then the transcription. And so that was building each item. And so that took a while because I had to build each of those individually for 95 letters. Once I finished those and had the kind of groundwork, the next thing was deciding how I wanted to display them. And so because this was a project tied to a semester, I only had a certain amount of time. So the next step was kind of prioritizing what I thought was important. And so as I was getting into the design portion of this, really kind of made the decision that the priority at all stages was going to be focusing on the letters and the transcriptions. And so every time I came to a kind of crisis or decision or challenge, the way I was going to solve what we decided to do was based on staying focused on the letters. And that came up a couple times. But the first step of that was, because I had a time limit, I had to choose which letters are most important in case I couldn't get to all of them. So I built all of them as items. The next stage was to make pages, which was kind of the real heart of this, was creating a page for each letter where you had the images side by side with the transcription. So you could look at the original and see his handwriting, but then actually have a readable and machine readable text of what he had. And so I went through and I picked about half of the letters for the best content, make sure I had an even distribution across the time and locations he was at. And it basically said, if I get these done, this project will be successful, even if I don't get to every single letter. And then once I did that, I had to start building the pages, which the pages are what the user sees when they go to the website. So on the back end, these are all the pages. And so there's a page for every location and a page for every letter. And this was 90% of the project, was just repetitively building these. But each one to build, Omeka S allows you to build your page using different type of blocks. And so you can see the blocks. These are the different types of blocks available. And so to figure out how to use those to make the page look on the front side the way I want it to look. And I had to experiment a little bit with that for a while. What I ended up with was interspacing media and HTML blocks to create the page. But actually, that's not a good example. So each original page of the letter gets 3 blocks. And so this had to be done by hand for each letter, which is one of the things about digital products. A lot of time people think about digital tools as speeding up our work and that the computer does all the work. But really, once you get into doing anything with any sort of digital tool, any sort of digital humanity, you realize you're just moving around where the work is. And so there ends up being a lot of data entry. But what this ends up looking like on the front end for the user is the original letter with the transcription next to it. All right. So once I had that built for the 54 kind of priority letters, the next thing I had to decide was how do I want this architecture to be structured so that people can find what they want to find. And because this is a general use site and it was really designed for the general public, I knew that there was going to be a lot of different use cases for people who came into contact with this, and that the same way to navigate wasn't going to work for everyone. So the kind of linear storytelling was not my focus. What I wanted was the ability for people to interact with the letters in a way it made sense for them and have multiple ways to find their way around. And so the next stage was kind of building that architecture and building different ways to find stuff. And so you can navigate through the map, you can navigate through Omeka-S pages, you can click on the first letter and just click next at the bottom to go all the way through. You can search by Library of Congress subject heading, you can search by keyword, and you can search by tags. And so we'll go into that a little bit more when I pull up the site at the end to kind of walk our way through, but that was kind of the next stage. And then I went back and finished the rest of the letters. So that was kind of the process of building this site. And then along with that, there were several things that became challenging as trying to get to my whiteboard with what Omeka-S could do. As those of you who worked in the bullpen while I was here can attest, there were days that were very frustrating trying to make Omeka-S do what I wanted to do. So once again, kind of what I would keep going back to is that idea that the letters should be the central thing. And so whatever's best for showcasing those is how we need to approach it. So one of the problems, for example, Omeka-S is a very immature software. It's only been out for about 2 years. And so and it's also designed to be an institutional software. So there's multiple other pages on this same server for other people in the library building pages. And so my control was limited compared to building a website from scratch. I couldn't get into the server and break down the CSS and change the code. And so it's kind of limited to the theme packages that Omeka-S ships with, which is 4 different themes that control the way it looks aesthetically. They control the font, the layout, how the navigation works. And so one of the first things that I really struggled with was how to display this, which theme to choose, because some of them I thought were more aesthetically pleasing. Others I didn't like as much. And then some were really good for displaying the navigation, but messed up the way the letters rendered. Others were good for the letters, but the navigation was confusing. And so that was one of the places where I had to say, all right, I really like center row, but it makes the letters hard to read. And so I ended up going with default, which as you can see is not the most aesthetically pleasing thing. Although one of the side benefits was it has the same color scheme as Luna. So when I link out to Luna, like it actually looks pretty, there's a good continuity there. Another problem I ran into is just that the workflow became much bigger than I expected. Stuff that I thought would be fairly routine took much longer, and specifically building the pages, because I was not the most forward-thinking person, and when I was doing the transcriptions, I didn't know what the end product was going to be. I did the transcriptions in Word, which if anyone hasn't spent any time developing at all knows that Word is awful. And so when I was building the pages and cutting and pasting from Word into there, I was cutting and pasting all of the code that Word inserts without you knowing. And so I had to go in for each HTML block and strip out code and write new code to get the text to lay out the way I wanted it to, which essentially made each letter take 20 to 35 minutes to build. depending on how long the letter was. And then the final thing was, this is what I wanted it to look like. I wanted it to look side by side, original with the transcription. But one of the things Omeka S doesn't do is have responsive pages, which means that if a page is responsive, it understands what you are looking at it with and will adjust the display to match. So a responsive page would know that you're looking at it on a laptop versus looking at it on a tablet versus looking at it on a cell phone, and it'll scale stuff to look best for that. Omeka doesn't do that, at least not yet. And so I would spend all day building pages, and they would look great on my work laptop, and then I would go home and pull them up on my personal laptop, and there'd be 3 lines pushed under because my screen was a different size than the screen. And so I struggled with that for a long time, and I actually went over to the center and talked to the developers over there to try and figure out a way to fix that, and eventually decided that open source is open source and good enough is good enough, and I would just have to let go and recognize that it wouldn't always perfectly match up. So, which is one of the lessons of working with open source software. All right. So if you want to hit the lights, let's take a look at what we ended up with. So this is the front landing page of the website, which is on the library's Omeka S server. And so you've got the kind of header there with the navigation, and then this is the embedded story map. And so like I said, there's a number of different ways to navigate this, but it's all built around those letters. And so you can go through the story map, and it'll bring you location by location to each place he was stationed. For each place he's stationed, there's a little bit description of what he did, why he was there, what he was doing while he was there. And then on the map, you can see each location, the icon showing on the map is either the unit crest or the unit shoulder sleeve insignia for the unit he was assigned to while he was at that location. And then each location has, on this kind of side panel here, has links to all the letters he wrote while at that location. So if we go to somewhere in Italy, this is the generic catch-all for during actual combat operations, he wasn't allowed to say where he was, so all of his letters from when he arrived until VE Day are headed somewhere in Italy rather than an actual location. But if you scroll down, it's got all the letters, and so each date links you out to one of the letters. And if you don't want to use the map, well, first of all, there's a how to navigate page that actually walks you through all the different ways you can do stuff. But there's also the locations, which just is a plain drop-down menu that has all of the letters. You can go to browse letters, which this is just all of the letters, all of the letters in the actual citation order that they are in the archive. So they're grouped by date chronologically and organized by the box and folder. So if you're an actual researcher, academic researcher who wants to use these letters for a project, this actually gives you the citation data, basically is how they're organized. If you don't want to go by location, you don't want to go chronologically, you want to search for specific things that are your interest, there's a couple ways to do that. There's the subjects, which these are based on Library of Congress subject headings. So they're formal Library of Congress subject headings that are associated with specific letters. And so if you want to read about the Army Specialized Training Program, you click on that, and it'll bring up all the letters that's mentioned. But most of the people in the room are librarians, so you know that the Library of Congress subject headings are a bit arcane at times and very difficult to find and work with. And so as I was doing the transcriptions, I added tags to each letter's transcription. And so much more informal kind of topics that were what he talked about in each letter. And so you can go to tags and look at all the different tags I've figured out. And if you want to see where he talked about Claire Booth Luce, it'll pull up the letter where she's mentioned. Or if you want to read about FDR, it's got all the letters that FDR has mentioned. And then the final way to search the letters is through the search. Now, this is another challenge that Omeka S created for me as I was doing it, because anyone who is born in the last 50 years, when they see a search bar, assumes it's a Google search and it's going to search everything. The way Omeka S is set up, the search bar just searches metadata. And so if it wasn't in the metadata field, it wouldn't show up in the search. But that's not what people think when they see it. They think it's going to search all the transcriptions, and anywhere something's mentioned, it'll show up. And so that was one of the things, the last things I did in the project was figuring out how to fix that. And I went a couple ways. I tried to see if there was a way that Omeka S let you do it, because I figured I'm probably not the sole use case where this has been a problem. And then I tried to find, there's a module that allows you to basically that'll basically strip out any text that's in the media. So that's why I put the transcription PDFs in the media files. But that didn't work for technical reasons. And so eventually I had to go back and, for all 95 letters, hand cut and paste the transcription into a new metadata field I created so that it's searchable. Which now means there's a bit of redundancy, because the transcription appears 3 different places. On the item level, it appears in a metadata field. It also appears as a PDF in the media field. And then obviously the pages have it as HTML. But since I wanted this to be accessible for multiple different use cases, I felt like redundancy was not necessarily that big a problem. And then, like I said, and then the one thing I did add was the Epstein Collection is way bigger than these letters. And I think there's a lot of great stuff in there that hasn't been tapped yet. One of the specific things that is incredible is during the war, Jerome's mother kept a scrapbook that included all sorts of military memorabilia and souvenirs that he sent home, postcards from various places in Italy, news clippings about the war and specifically the Italian theater. And so I wanted to include that in some way. So I digitally scanned that and put it into book reader form, linked it out to Luna. So that is available as well. And you can just click through it and see all the stuff that's in there. But there's no transcription or machine readable text for this, because this is something I did as fast as possible towards the end of the project. But the main focus is the letters. And so let's take a look at one of those. Or you'll be annoying. Fine. Luckily I built you, so I know how to find you. Okay, let's do it this way. Oh, you can also, you don't have to click through, you can actually move the map. Oh, that's gonna be slow. So you can actually move the map and click on the one you want as well. But so in addition to, so the letters, like I said, the main focus was having both the original and the transcription. But I also knew this was for a general audience, and so I wanted to take advantage of doing this digital project to add some value in addition to just the transcription. So there are places in the letters where he talks about stuff that was probably pretty common knowledge and comfortable for people living during World War II, but might not necessarily be familiar to modern day. And so at places I've included footnotes to kind of clarify stuff. For example, right here, someone says that he thinks the European war is going to start June 15th. And Jerome says, but what could a man like that know about the war? And to let the reader know that he was only off by about a week of the D-Day invasion. The other thing is that Jerome is very interested not surprising that someone related to Claire is very interested in theater and movies and entertainment. And so he talks a lot about what he went to see at the Post Theater, and wherever possible, I've included links out. So if he talks about a movie from the 1940s that you're probably not familiar with, you can click on it. That would have been cooler if it was attached to the big speakers. But yeah. But so most of the movies he talks about have either linked out to a full copy or, oops. Where in other places I've used just simply an IMDb entry to give you the kind of basic information, or at least a trailer, just to kind of add some realism. Realism may not be the right, but just kind of feel for what he's talking about through the use of multimedia, which is something you can do with digital products, and there's no need to just have it be solid text on paper or on a screen. Also, where available, I've done, so this is kind of a cool one. He's talking about doing some military training and talking about his rifle squad. He's describing what a rifle squad is, but he's pretty short on it, and so I've linked out to a 20-minute film about the organization of a World War II rifle squad, if you want to spend 20 minutes learning about the World War II rifle squad, which has 101,000 views, so apparently someone is interested. All right. And so that is basically the website. So I think at this stage, that basically concludes my formal portion. So let's let Bob fix the lights, and we'll take a quick break, and we'll come back and I'll answer any questions y'all have.
Okay, folks. The quick break is just for me to get up here to the microphone, make sure it's still on, which it is. So I'm going to pass the microphone around to whomever may have questions. If they can just give it back to me.
We're actually going to do questions? All right.
I'm sorry?
I thought we were using the first round's questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
I'm completely willing to answer questions. It was a slightly different presentation.
This is just an observation of an example of this is going to be one of those websites that is so powerful, and then when YouTube changes and goes away or something else happens, then those links will, that's going to be something that's going to have to be addressed, or those will just become dead links. That's just an observation that I was thinking. I was like, this is so cool. And then I was like, what about 20 years from now? So anyway, that's just an observation.
Yes, and I have two answers. The first is the current solution, which I've included in the How to Navigate page. There's actually a link to report any issues or broken links. And then I guess what I really should do is go through and perma-CC all the links on here, which is, in all of my free time. Yeah.
But that could be something that we can follow.
Right. Perma-CC or Internet Archive for the most of the stuff.
I have a question. I will also repeat that I don't regret not hiring you, because this is great. What was one of Jerome's, or what were some of Jerome's favorite foods, if you can answer that question?
Oh, he loved fried chicken, which is funny for like 18-year-old. He also really liked Boston Coolers, which I had to look up. It's like cherry soda and ice cream, like a scoop of ice cream and cherry soda, which when you're stationed at Fort Benning in August, makes all right, fair enough. But really, I'd say the funniest things for his food entries, the funniest one was he's stationed in Italy and is talking about the so-called ice cream that they have in Italy, and I was like, and then the other funny one was after the war, he's stationed in Colorado Springs at Fort Carson, Camp Carson at the time, Fort Carson today, and he talks about how like he's eating a steak like every night, and they have the best steaks that he's ever had in his life. And last night he went to the Antlers and had a steak dinner, which is funny because I was stationed at Fort Carson when I first came out of basic training, and the Antlers was the hotel I stayed in the night I got married with Sarah.
Aww. Well, thank you, Ben.
Hello. I'm just curious what kind of food he was actually sent. What was, oh, I mean, could they send fried chicken? What?
No, no.
I don't think so.
The food he's sent is typically canned fruit, stuff like that. Baked goods. His mom will send him cookies and candies. And one of the other things he writes about is what survives the trip and should be used again and what doesn't. Yeah. So.
Anybody else?
So my question is that you mentioned that there's a lot of other material in this collection that obviously isn't part of this particular project. Would you imagine in the future, if that material was digitized, that it would sort of expand what you've done with this site? Is that something you'd like to see, or sort of how do you envision the future of this collection?
Yeah, so certainly it could be, especially since it's already an Omeka S site. Certainly future iterations of the internship could do other parts of the collection, and even if they aren't made an integral part of this specific site, because it's Omeka S, you could have multiple sites that all kind of connect. And one of the things I didn't point out is I do have a link section that links to related materials. So there's like a link to the finding aid, a link to some of the blog posts that I've written on the project. And so that is a way you could build another Omeka S site that had other parts and find some way to integrate them, which is definitely something, since the library owns the server, is something that would be fairly easy. You would just have to get someone who knows how to use Omeka S.
This is just a great project, and thank you so much for doing it and for sharing it. There are hundreds and hundreds of people out there who have a project just like this. So family members who have got about 8 dozen letters and would like to preserve them for posterity and possibly create a site that shows where their loved one, traveled during the war. How long would it take somebody who doesn't have your kind of specialized ability as a historian and as a digital humanist to do something like this, and how user-friendly could it be made if you wanted to create a kind of kit that says
Right.
you've got 91 of great-grandfather's letters, you've got the Army Green Books, so it'll enable you to figure out where he was at various places. You can read cursive handwriting, and here's how you get started.
Yeah, so I certainly brought a level of skill that the average person is going to have, but it's not like I'm an award-winning digital humanist. And to be honest, and like there was a learning curve. I had to do some research. A lot of the stuff in Omeka S, I worked on previous projects. I worked on some projects for some of the Fenwick Fellows when I was over in DISC. But a lot of it is much like anything else you do on a computer, which is like messing around until you figure out how it works. And to be honest, that was actually certainly I have a comfort level with the tools that aren't someone who is in their 70s probably won't. But the vast majority of time spent on this project was not high skill stuff.
How long would the how-to guide be?
I think I could
For a grant, because I can just see this being...
I think I could do it easily in 15 pages. Because most of the work is honestly the repetitive work.
You should get my contact info.
It's possible I have that. No, most of the hours spent on this are either the sitting in the digital lab, running stuff through a scanner, sitting at a computer, and then building the pages. And the only thing of that is something that you would have to learn is the architecture of Omeka S. And you wouldn't have to do something as elaborate as this if it was just a personal project. Once you built the pages, that would probably be sufficient for most people. And so it's definitely something that could be replicable, and I probably should write up the documentation of, at the very least, at the very least, I should write up the documentation of this is the blocks and the order you do to build a page that looks like this, in case, SCRC hires another L cleric and canon intern next year who they want to do more stuff. But yeah, no, that's actually a great idea, is that this is something that might be interesting for a wider public.
I mean, I've spoken to dozens and dozens of these people, and if you get